Hi, I'm Kyle Bleeker, the pastor of Friends Tustin, and I'm glad you're checking out some of our online content today. Along with our in person gatherings, which are every Sunday at 10 a.m., we have a number of different ways to help people get connected to our community and discover what God, the Bible, and Jesus have to do with your life. So check out our website to learn more or send our team a message directly using one of the links so we can help you find your way. Thanks again for taking the time. Now, on to this week's message. So we are starting a new series today that is specifically looking at the book of Nehemiah. If you're not familiar with the Old Testament, that's okay, but Nehemiah is interesting because it's actually a book that is really originally was read in partnership with two other books, three actually. So the book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and then Ezra and Nehemiah are kind of all lumped together. They don't sit that way within our Bible, and yet for anybody who was a part of the community of Israel, they would recognize that these three books really give a very clear picture of a period in time that was referred to as the exile, or the pre-exile leading to the exile. Now, Exodus is fairly famous because we have movies about it that were made, whether it was, the Ten Commandments or other things like that. People can kind of imagine or visualize the Exodus, which is where the people of Israel leave Egypt so that they can become free and pursue the promised land, right? But guess what? There is a further part of the history of the nation of Israel where they eventually are in the promised land, but they don't live up to the promise. And so eventually, terrible things happen. They are conquered, and eventually they are exiled, they are deported, they are taken away from their homeland, and that is where we actually would pick up with Nehemiah. He is a second-generation exile. So he has never lived in the nation of Israel. In fact, he is a person who most likely just has heard these stories from his grandparents, but he is someone who has actually risen up within the ranks within the king's household, and that's where we're going to pick up. So I want to do something with you this morning as we get started, just to be able to have you visualize a little bit, okay? I'm not a movie director, but I'm going to paint a scene for you, okay? And if at the end of it you're like, I couldn't follow, Kyle, then man, I tried, right? But here we go. I'm not looking for any awards. But first off, here's just a picture of an ancient Persian palace, okay? Now imagine you're there. This is the scene. The royal house is running and working. It is bustling. It is actually the height of the Persian Empire at this time. And this is the king of Persia's winter palace. During these certain seasons of the year, he would move and he would be in this place. And it's kind of like an episode of Downton Abbey. You have the chance to see behind the curtains and behind the walls, to see all of the beds being made, to see all of the business decisions happening, the purchases going on in the back rooms. You see messages being sent out and children being played with and cared for. There's kind of this cadence that you see, a rhythm that's happening within the palace as it runs. But everything is extravagant and beautiful. And then the scene cuts away to the rooms where the servants live. And there in the dark is a man on his knees, and his face is to the ground. And his body is actually shaking because he is crying. And you can hear just slightly his muffled prayers. There's mourning. There are tears that are dropping from his face. And he's actually got his hands out in front of him, and he is shaking them and pleading in his prayer. And then there's a knock. And the man stops. His name is called, and he is told the meal is ready. And he says, I'm coming. Rises to his feet. He goes over to a small bowl. He splashes his face with water. He wipes it. He quickly puts on his robe. He steps to the door. And now you see his face for the very first time. And his expression is one of weight. His mouth is creased down in worry. He's taking short breaths. And then suddenly, deep breath, composure, and his face changes just in a moment to confidence and even kind of a small grin, like he's just shifted his mentality. And he steps out and he greets the first person that meets him positively. As he walks through the hallways, everyone defers to him and acknowledges him. And he's kind, but clearly he also has status. And clearly he also is in charge of certain things. Eventually, after moving through the halls, he comes to the kitchens and he greets the cooks. He addresses a stern man over in the corner who gives him a sharp nod, letting him know that everything is running in the way that it should be. And then he ducks through a door into a massive dining room with a lavish table that's completely overflowing with food. He stands over the dishes near the end, and he signals a servant who then provides him with a sample of food from each and every one of the dishes. And very efficiently, he tastes them. He tastes everything on the platter, and he turns and gives the servants notes on what he's tasting. Some dishes are actually removed, others are kept. And as he thinks about all the different things that are laid out in front of him, he asks for wine and for water. And it comes, and he drinks, and he samples, and eventually he chooses one and says, this is the one that they'll go with, and the other ones are taken away. And then he pours from that wine into a very special cup, a very ornamented cup. And he takes that one and he makes a signal, and all the other servants step away. And he steps back, stands immediately to the side of the throne, and then looks up to see the king of Persia and his entourage coming into the room. He is the cupbearer, and his name is Nehemiah. And the story that we are going to be reading in the book of Nehemiah within the Bible is his account of when he comes to a place where he has to make a great request of the king, and what he does as he goes from a place of immense sorrow to a place of request. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. And so what I'd love for you to do, that's the scene, okay? Scene and done, all right? There you go. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually read with you from the book of Nehemiah, the opening chapter. And it's 11 verses. But I'd invite you, you can follow along on the screen. If you have your Bible, you can turn to Nehemiah. If you have it on your phone, please pull it up. But this is an account that is actually the words of Nehemiah himself. And you will hear a little bit of his own kind of emotional struggle and what he is praying and saying as he's in these moments of challenge. So, dear God, as we read your word, we pray that you would just speak to us, that you would give us insight from your scripture that enables us to live more and more in step with you. We love you, God. We pray this in your name. Amen. So, Nehemiah 1, verse 1 through 11, it says this: The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. And they said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates have been burned with fire. And when I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, the decrees, and laws that you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to a place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. That is the opening chapter of the book of Nehemiah. And in that little visual that we were doing earlier, I was trying to give you just a sense of some of the work and the responsibility of a cupbearer. A cupbearer was not just a food taster, although that was part of their job, was to make sure that they always had tasted the food that was going to be consumed by the king and his family, to make sure that it was not poisoned or that there wasn't anything bad on it. So he was one part dietitian, right? But then on top of that, you have to remember this is a person who had to be trusted. There was no one else who had as dangerous of a meal every single day as what the cupbearer had. Every one of his meals could potentially kill him. Every one of his meals could potentially kill the king. And so the cupbearer was actually a quite high position. It had to be someone of trust. And so this often is thought of somewhat as like a secret service agent, right? Somebody who watches the food and drink, but also has a role to play in making sure that it's what the king wants and it's the right palate, right? So it's not always the easiest job. But on top of that, the cupbearer was also at the table with the king every single day, every single meal. He went with the king wherever the king went. And so the king didn't want to be bored by this person, right? The king wanted this person to be someone that he enjoyed or that he actually would consider to be an advisor, someone that he was having conversation with. So the cupbearer had, in some settings, a very, very big role. But there was a significant difference between the king and the cupbearer. The cupbearer could be a servant or a slave, but the cupbearer was somebody who was highly trusted. Now, what we see in this passage, specifically at the very beginning of Nehemiah, is the fact that there is a little bit of a time skip that we don't experience right in the text. So at verse 4, it states, or at the opening verse, it says, "In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa." Now, they know that the citadel of Susa was the winter palace of the king of Persia. They also know that Kislev would have been the month that was happening most likely mid-November to mid-December. That's the way that the Jewish calendar works. And so in the text, there's this point where it says, "For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." It says some days, right? And then, verse 5 says, "Then I said," right? Now, in between that little jump right there is probably about 4 months. And the reason why we know that is because chapter 2 starts by talking about the fact that in the month of Nisan, right, which is mid-March to mid-April, that's when he actually has his conversation with the king of Persia. And so that gives us just a little bit of a picture of the fact that he receives the bad news, he holds it, he mourns, he grieves, but that on multiple occasions, what he did was he got up after grieving, and when he had to go and do his job, he did not make his sadness apparent to the king. He hid it. He did his job. And so for 4 months, this is what he does. He just continues to carry the weight and the burden of the fact that the city of Jerusalem, he has heard, is in complete disrepair, though the walls are not up. But eventually, he gets up the courage to be able to have a conversation with the king that he is interacting with every single day. So this little text thing, the jump between Kislev and Nisan, tells us that it's 4 months that he's been thinking on this and really working it through. And one of the things I want to do is I want to just give you a little bit of, very quickly, a little bit of historical perspective, okay? I don't want to have to give you a deep history lesson, but I want to look at just a little timeline here with you really quickly. So the city of Jerusalem originally fell to the superpower of Babylon in the year 586, okay? This was 136 years after the northern kingdom of Israel had been conquered by Assyria, Jerusalem, it was a city that actually was in the southern kingdom of Judah. All right, so Judah held on for another 136 years, but the superpower of Assyria completely wiped out the northern kingdom and took them all into exile. But the people that were in Jerusalem were taken to Babylon. They were deported there. They were brought there. All their possessions either were stolen or were taken from them. In 539, another superpower comes along. And this time it's the Persian Empire. And they conquer Babylon. And then, in just a short time, literally the course of about a year, the king over Persia, whose name was Cyrus, actually has favor upon the Jews. And what he wants is that any conquered people who could possibly go and pray to their God on his behalf would rebuild their sacred sites and then begin to pray for him, the king of Persia. And so he is fine with having like some of his resources and other things like that go out to help rebuild these temples of conquered kingdoms because he wants their gods to be on his side. So in 538, he actually allows exiles to return to Jerusalem, and we hear about that within the Old Testament, about this returning, and people were celebrating, they were so excited, but they also were devastated. Because if you go back to your home after it has been flooded, or you go back to your home after an earthquake, you're glad to go back, but you're also just destroyed because it is not your home in the way that it was before. And so there's this difficulty that's happening. A number of years later, Haggai and Zechariah, people who are also within our Bible, their tale is kind of told about how they try to encourage the people of Israel to rebuild the temple because the temple was completely destroyed, demolished, and so they need to be able to actually go back and rally the people to finish the job of rebuilding the temple. Eventually they do. It takes about 20 years, but the temple restoration is complete in 516, and then a number of years pass. 58 years pass, and then there is a second return of exiles under a man named Ezra, and then even more years pass, and there's a third return that is offered to a man named Nehemiah. Why do I give you this context? It's because I want you to understand that the apocalypse has happened to the people of Israel. We have within our popular culture this idea of apocalypse. Oh my gosh, what if a nuclear weapon went off and completely destroyed our life? Or what if we make things so toxic that we can't, support life anymore, right? Or what if zombies come, right? What if zombies, right? That's what everybody's always thinking about, right? Well, we love to have movies about the apocalypse, and then we watch people live on the other side of it. What I want you to understand is that Nehemiah, for him and for his people, the apocalypse happened. It was Assyria, it was Babylon, it was Persia. Every time they were just more and more degraded. People died, family members are gone, property, everything that they owned is just decimated. And so Nehemiah, though he has standing in the Persian royal house, is a person who has never been there to Jerusalem, and yet he lives on this side of the apocalypse. The promised land is gone. His family has no roots. It's all gone. And so Nehemiah receives word back from some of his brothers about Jerusalem, and he weeps. And what I want to point you to is the fact that when he received bad news, he actually did some pretty noble and noteworthy things. So when he received bad news, he did what I think many of us should do, which is that he grieved. So his first thing is just the fact that he is upset by this news. He actually allows it to affect him. But he keeps perspective in the midst of it. He keeps kind of his overall understanding. He doesn't get lost in the grief. And then he does something really profound, which we get to see within his prayer. He keeps perspective about God and who God is. So his prayer opens by actually giving a lot of praise to God. And then he goes in to confession. I don't know about you, but when something goes bad in our greater world, when there's bad news that lands, I don't find myself going to a place of confession. Either confessing to God collectively on behalf of my nation or on behalf of the people that I'm a part of, or even individually, for my own kind of messes or my own ways. But Nehemiah does both. He says, God, we confess to you that we have been wicked, that we have not followed your commands. And he is brokenhearted about the way that the nation has acted and where they find themselves now on the other side of this apocalypse. But he also owns it for himself. And he says, I haven't done this. My father's family have not followed your commands. I've messed up. So it's not just a story out there. It's personal for him. And what I love about the text is that when he's praying, this is not just a social concern or a political issue. For him, everything that's going on is ultimately about his relationship with God. He says in verse 5, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant. It's very personal. This isn't just an editorial being written to be put out in the newspaper. This is him trying to talk with God. And it is about his relationship. He says, when he's confessing, he literally says, we have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave. He's saying, God, I've hurt you. I have done things that are wrong. We as a people have done things that are wrong. And so he confesses. But within that confession, he also remembers. He dares to actually say, hey, God, I know that you said through Moses that when we disobeyed, that you would scatter us to the nations. But I also remember that you said if we would turn back to you, that you would return us. And God, I have an opportunity to go and talk to the king. And God, I wonder whether or not you might be willing to give us favor, to have grace upon us. And then he asks. He took his time, right? 4 months is a good chunk of time. But he is constantly positioning himself, preparing himself to make sure that he's prayed and then he's ready to be able to make a request of the king of Persia. And just so you understand this, if the king of Persia was having a bad day and you came up to him and said, king, and he was like, I don't like the way you're looking at me, you would be gone. He has no problem replacing you in a moment. And he could do it with no questions asked. You would potentially be killed or you would just be shipped away. And so there's great risk for Nehemiah in this situation. We're not really getting into today what his conversation with the king looks like. That'll be over the course of the next number of weeks as we get to look at his life and what ends up happening. But he gives us a great example of what we should do when we encounter bad news and how we walk it through. But he gives us something even better in the midst of all of this. And that is that he really shows us what the heart of all people is really longing for. He comes to a point where he says in verse 9, he's talking about the instruction given to Moses, and he says, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and my commandments, then even your exiled people who are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them. I will bring them to a place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. What he's saying is, he's like, hey, God, I'm praying to you. Not just, he's concerned about the walls, right? Because he knows what walls signify. They are safety. They make sure that you're not vulnerable. They are a way that a city can actually be protected. And they give definition to something that otherwise is just, imagine if your neighbors or anybody could just walk in and out of your house at any point in time, right? It wouldn't go well, right? I don't want that. I don't even want my kids in my bedroom, right? I'm just like, please, stay out, right? But what happens is that we get to a point where we don't recognize within this that he was concerned about the walls. But even more so, he was concerned about the fact that the hearts of the people of Israel were not in alignment with God. That they were not able to worship him. They were not connected with him. They were in disarray. And so he's calling out and he's beginning with confession because he says, God, I'll repent. I want to turn back to you. I want all people of Israel to return that we might know you, God. And remember, he's never even been to Jerusalem, but he lives on the other side of the apocalypse. And so he knows the outcomes of it and he is ripped apart by it. and he is saddened by it. And I think sometimes that's what we within the church need to make sure that we are calibrated to. That when we look out at our cities and we see people who are in poverty and we see, teenagers or other people who are just lost to the temptations of social media or to other things, right? When we ourselves feel like that pull towards the development of our profession over maybe the development of our families or our own character, when we are constantly watching a culture that is biting and gnashing at each other, people attacking one another, any chance that they have to either be able to elevate themselves or to tear someone else down, around all kinds of political issues, we have to remember that our greatest longing, the greatest need that we have is a return to the right kind of relationship. He sees the walls are in disarray, and he's going to do something about that. And we should see poverty, and we should see injustice, and we should think we need to do something about that. But we also need to sit back and mourn over the fact that what it is a symptom of is the fact that the hearts of humanity are not in line with the King, with God. And we have lost that. And that we would actually feel that even within our own guts. As I've been reading this, I've been sitting back and thinking like, oh, it's not just enough for me to preach to everybody else. I got to sit back and say, wait, God, where have I wandered? Where am I lost? Where am I in a place where I need to return? And I need to look at my life and be like, oh, it's totally broken down. There's no walls. There's no boundaries. There's no promise. There's no hope. There's no help. What am I doing? I, too, need to raise my hand and say, my family and me, we've been wicked towards you, God, and I need to return. Because I've let things slide. I've been open to the wrong things for too long. And so our greatest longing in life, our greatest need is to return to that right relationship that becomes the center of everything else we do, the heartbeat of it that actually pumps the life into us that we're looking for. So we as a church, we are hoping to have a home. A place that actually we can lift up God's name. We've been here for a number of months, and it's been good. We've been able to grow here. We've been able to build relationships. We're going to move to a new community here in just a little while, a new neighborhood, and we're going to have our signs out front. We're going to see if there can be ways that we can interact with some of the people in the neighborhoods. That's great. I don't know what God has for us in that. But what I know is that there are people within the apartments and the houses. There are people who go to that school. There are kids in that neighborhood running around who 100% need to have their hearts return to a right relationship with the King. And I know that that's what we need as well. What Nehemiah is going to try and do is to return to Jerusalem and help a community of people center themselves on the worship of God in a way that actually changes them and transforms the society around them. That's what we're doing. That's what our church is about. We come together, we gather around the person of Jesus and around God so that we might be transformed and changed, and out of that, bring that transformation and change to the very cities, streets, workplaces, restaurants that we go to. And so Nehemiah is going to be a book, I think, that has a lot to talk to us about today. But where does Nehemiah start? Nehemiah starts with an awareness of who God is. You are the one who keeps loving. You are the one who is faithful. It moves to a place of honesty, a place of confession, a place of brokenness, actually, which we should not be afraid of. And then it moves into remembering what God has said and asking for God to give favor. And this is what I love. You don't even get this scene yet, right? This will be next week. And then it moves into action. And so Nehemiah is a book that is very, very practical and that challenges us to actually be people who, it says in one point in the book, they prayed and they put up a guard. And that's what we're going to figure out what it looks like for us to do in this next season, is what does it look like for us to be people who pray and who spiritually engage with God and who also are readying our feet and our hands to take action in the right ways on behalf of this city. So I have a little bit of homework for you in this coming week. I want you to read Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2. The first chapter we just read through, but I want you to actually have time to look at the words. I think that Nehemiah chapter 1 is one of the most beautiful prayers that we can model our own prayers after. It's a great picture of a man who has been wrestling with something and yet is in a place where he wants God's involvement in his life. So that's one of the homework for you. Read Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2. And then here's the second part. And this is challenging because we live at a speed that doesn't always allow us the opportunity or the room to be able to do this. The team's going to come out here and we're going to sing in just a second. But this is what I want to talk to you about. Sometimes the great vision that we need to have for our lives will actually come through the awareness of darkness and brokenness and kind of the problem that we are called to be able to address. Nehemiah, his whole, if he had not heard this bad news and had not been rocked by it, he would most likely not be ready and he would not have prepared himself to make an impact in the way that we're going to learn within the book that he does. And guess what? That needs to be, I think, the truth for all of us. There are so many things that are going on within our world right now that I think really break people's hearts. The question is not, God, or this week, should I sit in all of that and just, drink a big old drought of all the darkness that's out there in the world? That's not what this is not a doom scroll, okay, in your personal life. What this is a conversation with God, a very open one, where you just sit before God and you say, God, what about the world is really grieving me? Really, I can't shake it. And God, what about myself? Am I grieving? Am I in a place of just awareness about that I want to turn from and I actually want to return to you in? That's my hope for you this week. We're going to keep unpacking over the next number of weeks as we go further into the book of Nehemiah, what the process of actually following God, walking things through, figuring out obstacles. That's what we get to do in the book of Nehemiah, is brick by brick, figure out how does obedience to God actually lead to an extraordinary life. That's what the whole series' little tagline is all about. But my hope for us as we start is that we would actually dare to go to the place that Nehemiah went, was that on his knees before God, he just stated, God, I'm broken about the state of life, but I see who you are. I remember who you are. And I want you to actually be a part of what this new plan and this new vision and this new way of life looks like for me. My prayer is that as we all begin to do this, that as you all have the same kind of conversation with God, that he would use this to begin to unite us as a church more and more towards things that we collectively should be about. And I don't know what those things are. I don't have all the answers. But my hope is that over the course of this season, as we discern together, what are the things that God lays upon our hearts, and we talk with one another, that God will raise some things up that then we get to go after. And we figure out what our call was. Because Nehemiah, he was just the leader, but there were thousands of people who joined him in this movement, the third return. And so that's what we get to press into.